Welcome back to another naval news update. Hope you're enjoying your holiday weekend, whether you celebrate Thanksgiving or the World Cup. It's a holiday either way, right? You probably don't celebrate both, to be honest with you. We have some really positive news to start today off with. Big congratulations to Lieutenant Commander, Spoken Commander, Amber Cohen for becoming the first female executive officer in the United States Navy submarine force. Big salute to her. This is a huge accomplishment. I love watching this first cadre or cohort of women officers and enlisted, working their way through the ranks. And it won't be long before they're in charge of our ballistic and attack missile submarines. So it's great to see. A little background on Amber here, or the commander. Let me just give her some due respect here. The XO, she graduated from University of Washington in 2010. Does that make you feel old or what? And she went right into the Navy right after that. She served on board the USS Maine on the Blue crew. That's my old crew. So it's a shame our timelines didn't line up, but we served at least on the same crew, just at different times. There she was the tactical systems officer and the damage control assistant, two very good roles for an up-and-coming junior officer. She then went on to serve as the engineering duty officer. I'm sure she had other roles other than that on board the USS Texas, which is a fast attacker Virginia class submarine. So she's had both ballistic missile experience, which is good, and fast attack, experience, which is very important to get for being, a tactical officer. And then she went on to be the Pacific Fleet radiological controls officer, which means she's very good at upholding a high standard of safety and bookkeeping. She can keep track of everything. So she's definitely hit all the wickets for being a reliable and responsible officer. And I'm, proud to see her advancing and being selected as an executive officer on board the USS Kentucky. Yeah, so good for her. And just to give you guys some a wider scope of what's going on in the Navy, we are now up to 28 submarines that have integrated crews, which means both men and women on both ballistic missile submarines and Virginia class. I believe there's some 688s in there as well. But so good for them for integrating this. And now a word from our sponsor. Thank you to Established Titles for sponsoring this video. Established Titles is a fun and novel way to preserve woodlands of Scotland and help global reforestation efforts. Established Titles has purchased hundreds of acres of land and is contractually committed to preserve the land in its natural state. Established Title souvenir certificate packs give you 1 square foot plot of land on a private estate in Edelston, Scotland. It's 1 square foot. It's symbolic. Your certificate has a unique plot number on it, which you can see the exact location of your plot. This project is based on, meaning it's inspired by, a historic Scottish custom where landowners are referred to as lards or lords and ladies in English. With your Established Titles, souvenir certificate and crest, you can make a fun change to your name of lord or lady on credit cards, plane tickets, dating profiles. It's a good laugh. Established Titles will plant a tree with every order and work with global charities One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future to support global reforestation. Established Titles has donated to plant over 2 million trees. If you're doing some last-minute holiday shopping, this is the perfect gift. You can order a digital certificate and print it out all within 5 minutes. Established Titles is running a massive holiday sale right now, and if you use code SUB, you get an additional 10% off. So go to establishedtitles.com/sub and get your gifts now and help support the channel. The first 200 people purchasing a title pack using my link will effectively be next to my plot. It's within a few minutes walking distance. Depending on how many of you want to become a lord or lady, we can build a little subbrief kingdom. Give someone a title this holiday season. Preserve woodlands in Scotland and support global reforestation with Established Titles. Now, a little more serious topic here is our Secretary of Defense met with China's Minister of Defense, a peer-to-peer meeting between two powers. The China's minister's name is General Wei Fang, and our Secretary of Defense is Lloyd Austin. We've talked about him many times on this channel. And they're discussing, how can they deconflict and maintain lines of communication between our two militaries to prevent an accident from happening. That's one of the purposes of this talks. But of course, along with these talks, they took advantage of the opportunity, our Secretary of Defense, to bring up the number of PLA flights that have been, flown into Japan's economic zone and flying very near Taiwan in a very provocative manner. In one instance, there was a Chinese fighter that flew in front of one of our maritime patrol planes, and it might have been Australian, but a maritime patrol plane representing our interest, and it released clouds of chaff, which is like a defensive measure, for no reason other than to try to make our plane change course. Of course, our plane didn't, sucked in the chaff, damaged the engines, could have been much worse, could have lost the plane, but we didn't. And so, repeated actions like that just continue to ratchet up tensions between our countries, and it's not necessary at all. He also brought up, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin brought up the North Korean ballistic missile launches. Could China talk to the rocket man up there and get him to calm down a little bit? Shooting dozens of missiles in a day is just ridiculous, and it's not needed for testing. You can't say that you just launched 12 missiles just to get the data from it. You can do that with one missile. Of course, China responded to that specific incident that, hey, if you want to, keep North Korea from doing something, go talk to them. Don't talk to China. That's their response to that type of thing. There's also a lot of destabilizing actions happening with Taiwan in terms of public rhetoric coming out of China, talking about reunification and bringing Taiwan under, national control again. Because if you remember, the civil war that ended up dividing the country of China and Taiwan, it never came to a resolution. There was never a formal agreement, treaty, ceasefire, anything. Technically, the civil war is still on. It's just been a Cold War for, 70 years now, a very long time. And that continues to be unresolved, and China is determined to resolve it, which we'll get to in a second. And then finally, Secretary of Defense there on the left said or reminded China that the United Nations had put forth a ruling all the way back in 2016 saying that China has no claim to the islands and man-made islands that they are putting troops and sensors and radars and airports on in the South China Sea. And so the Chinese party listened to all those complaints, did make the response about the North Korean ballistic missile, saying that they don't have any control over that. And they responded with this. From the Chinese point of view, Taiwan is an internal affair. And that's something that maybe the West, we should consider. Because that civil war was never resolved, it's still ongoing. It's just not hot right now and hasn't been for a very long time, right? So any kind of interference in that civil war is seen to them as not, you don't have any grounds. The United States or anybody else, according to China, doesn't have grounds to interfere in what is considered by China to be an internal affair that's going to be resolved by them. And he reiterated his commitment that the Chinese armed forces, so not political, the military, is going to reunify Taiwan with mainland China. That is going to happen. And I would stress that we need to believe them. This is going to happen. We just don't know when. But China has repeatedly said, since 2012 especially, repeated over and over again that they will reunify with Taiwan, mainland China will, which means there's going to be, at some point, a level of military involvement in that reunification process. And it is really up to everybody else to decide where we are going to stand when that happens. A lot of people think, if we want to go back to the Davidson window video we did a few weeks ago, it could be in 2027, 2028. So it could be a short 5 years from now, whenever this reunification begins. And we need to have our plans in place as to how we're going to respond to that. But before that happens, right? But make no mistake about it, China will move on Taiwan. We just don't know what the timetable is here. It keeps getting pushed back further and further. But in the end, both parties resolved to maintain lines of communication between their militaries so that there isn't an accidental, engagement where there's a loss of life or equipment resulting in a larger conflict. We don't want that to happen. And so we continue to maintain these back channels, they're often called, between generals and like the Pentagon and their version of the Pentagon, just to resolve issues. A good example of this is in Syria. Russian troops and American troops were on opposite sides, in an active war zone for many years and still are. They're still over there. So we have channels between Russian military operators at the operation level and, at the staff level and on the American side as well, just to deconflict before any attack begins to make sure that we don't start a shooting war with Russia. So it's that same kind of resolution we have with China coming out of this. So at least we got that resolved. And we just need to, on the American side of things, we need to understand that there will be a reunification with Taiwan. We just need to decide if we're going to go to a shooting war over it. All right. The next one is a follow-up on a story we had talked about. A tanker called Pacific Zircon was attacked by a Shahed 136 drone. And in that video, I had said that this was an Iranian attack. So let me clarify this. Iran builds these drones and uses them, but also sells them. And because of the location of the attack, it was likely that this attack was launched by the Houthi, which are in a war in Yemen. And the ship was passing by Yemen when it was attacked. So just for geolocation purposes, it's more likely that this was a Houthi attack instead of an Iranian attack, but it was an Iranian drone. So let's make that very clear here. So what damage did this Houthi drone? One, how do we know it was a Shahed 136, right? Well, we had sent a Navy team on board the ship after the attack to investigate, literally pick up the pieces, some of which you see photographs of right here, to identify what the drone was. They also take samples of the blast to see where the where the explosive is most likely to be made. And of course, that was Iran. That does not mean Iran flew the drone. It was probably this rebel sect called the Houthis that are now in Yemen. Some of the damage that was done to the ship was the boiler was damaged, potable water tank, so the fresh drinking water was damaged, and a life raft on the back of the ship was damaged. You can see where the attack happened right here. They appear to maybe have been trying to hit the superstructure. That's the big white thing right there. That's where a lot of the living spaces are. And so we've seen in previous attacks where that's where these suicide or attack drones had hit. So they do appear to frequently target the superstructure, to invoke casualties, because that's where the berthing, the crew's mess, the crew's quarters are, whether it's the gym or the lounge, and also the watch spaces for controlling the ship itself are up there at the top. So it's often what they aim for. It created a 30-inch hole that you can see right there. And like I said, damaged a boiler and a couple tanks inside. Luckily, this time nobody was killed. A couple years ago, whenever they did the similar attack using the same style of drone, they ended up killing 2 sailors on board of this. This is just straight up attempted murder that they were lucky that they failed at doing. Attacking a ship off the shore that is in no way involved with any kind of conflict with the Houthis is a little ridiculous, but this is the kind of stuff that's happening right now in that region of the world. And finally, let's get to Russia. This old girl, the Kuznetsov, is still around. This is it's the only aircraft carrier in the Russian Navy. It has been in dry dock, layup, maintenance, whatever you want to call it, maintenance availability, for 5 years now, since 2017. Her maintenance keeps getting pushed back further and further because there's been casualties. There was a fire on board her that caused extensive damage that had need to be repaired, and that pushed the timeline back even farther for getting her back to sea. She was also in a floating dry dock, if you remember, and in the floating dry dock sunk because it was so old and not maintained. It wasn't able to stay afloat with such a large vessel inside. So they have her in a regular dry dock here in the picture. And this is where she stands as of today. The reason why this is even in the news is they finally announced a date. TASS, the Russian news source that's sponsored and run by the Kremlin, almost said Pentagon. They said that it's going to be completed in 2024. So, but don't hold your breath. I'm telling you, this thing is most likely, probably going to have another fire just because they can't help themselves. And these schedules always get pushed back further and further. And the estimate right now, if they do maintain this schedule, is that it's going to cost 350 million rubles for this entire repair, going all the way back to 2017. And why that's important, why we even have it in the story here today, is because that's 350 million rubles they can't spend in Ukraine. This thing is an albatross around the military budget of Russia. So I hope they continue to pour money into this thing. I will be shocked if it actually goes to sea ever again. And it just continues to suck money out of the Russian military so they can't build, more bombs or, equip more soldiers because they're spending it on this thing right here. Now, one thing that we can say is that we know that they added CWIS, close-in weapon systems, because you can see it right there in the picture. But we really don't know what other systems they added to this. A big problem with this ship for years before it went into dry dock in 2017 were its boilers, which is the prime mover of the entire ship. And they would have to gut the entire ship to pull those boilers out and replace them. We saw no hull cuts that were that large of size to do that kind of work. But maybe they've modified the boilers in some way in which they're a little more reliable. But if they have not addressed the boiler issue, if that's still the same system that they had before where it's inefficient, it's extremely unreliable, even if you manage to get it started, there's no guarantee that it's going to continue to work. That's why they take supply and repair ships, literally repair tugs for towing with submarines and with these large ships every time they go to sea. Because embarrassingly, this thing has had to be tugged and pulled around back to port more than once in its life. And it's all due to those boilers and how unreliable they are. And if they haven't addressed that, well, maybe they should spend a few more rubles doing that. All right. Well, thanks for watching the Naval News with me today. Hope you enjoy it. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.